Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nicole. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at the Neat Company, and I've worked with Neat for over 9 years now. With me today, I also have George and Tia, who are two of our customer success leads here at Neat. George, has tons of experience in using Neat over the years and is a bit of a technical guru. And we also have Tia, who specializes in onboarding in Neat, and they are here to help answer all of your Neat-related questions. If you guys haven't done so already, you may have noticed that there is a poll that's popped up to your right. This poll is asking you how you guys use Neat. So if you have time to do so, please fill the poll out. Let us know if you're using Neat for personal or for business or maybe a mix of both. These polls really help us to plan out future webinars. So any feedback you can provide is extremely helpful. In today's webinar, we're going to look at our recommended workflow for building and organizing your Neat database. So we put this webinar together mainly for beginners. But if you're an existing user, this also serves as a great refresher if you're looking on how you can use Neat best to organize your files so that you can easily find them and also use your data for reporting. In addition to this 3-step workflow that we're going to go over, we're going to talk about some beginner topics with Neat, things like item types and how they differ, file categories and how you can use those categories to learn valuable insights about your files, and also your Neat folder structure with some recommendations that we have for how you can set up a structure that is easy to manage. We have 3.5 downloadable handouts to share with you guys today, so make sure you stick around for those. And at the end of today's webinar, we're going to do a quick Q&A session where we can address any specific questions you guys have about organizing your files in Neat. Just a heads up, you won't be able to use your mic at all to ask any questions throughout the webinar, but if you do have any questions, just pop them in the chat box to the right and someone will follow up with you. I do want to clarify, one thing that we're not going to be talking about today is we're not going to be talking about adding any files to Neat. Today, we're going to be focusing on what to do with your files after you've added them to Neat. There are 4 main ways that you can get files into Neat. And if that's something you want to learn more about, then I recommend checking out our decluttering webinar. Since this is a beginner's course, we're going to first quickly just talk about the anatomy of a Neat file. And this is going to help you guys as beginners, any beginners here, to understand what I'm referencing later on in this webinar. So let's take a look at the anatomy of a file. So here you can see a screenshot of a file in Neat. This is what it will look like if you were to open one of your files in Neat. And each file has a data section, which is on the left, and an image section, which is on the right. And this data section here to the left is what really makes up your Neat database. This is all of the data that you're able to use in your reports and your filters in Neat. And this is really where a lot of the power of Neat comes from. Other storage solutions like Dropbox and Google Drive, they don't allow you to label and categorize your files to the level that Neat does. And through this data, you're able to establish this consistent naming convention for your files, which is absolutely necessary for having a well-organized database. So focusing on the data side, the left side of the screen here with all of this data here, let's talk about the anatomy of a file. So there are 4 parts to the data section of a file. So you have the item type, which is number 1 at the very top left-hand corner of the data section of a file. And there are actually 9 different file types that you can store in Neat. And each one of these item types has its own set of file fields and functions. And we're going to come back to item types in a minute. But let's move on to the next part. Part 2 of a file would be the folder. The file folder is really simple. It just tells you where your file's located in your database. So pretty straightforward. Underneath those 2 things, then you have all of your file fields. All of those boxes that you see there are considered your file fields, and they're kind of broken up into 2 separate sections. So at the very top, you have your file detail fields. And your file detail fields tell you key facts about your file, such as the name of your file, dates associated with your file, and amounts associated with your file. Information that is really factual and probably somewhere on the image of the file, and you can't really dispute it. Then underneath the file detail section, you have the file classification fields section. And this is for your unique classifications of a file, how you want to categorize your file, which one of your unique projects or customers or properties is associated with this file or your files. And then underneath all of your file fields is the last section of a file, which is your notes. And the file notes are separate from your file fields. With file fields, you can do things like filter, and you can run reports using all your file fields where you can't with your file notes. So they are two separate sections. Now, throughout this webinar, I'm going to be referring to these different parts of a file. So if you want to reference this slide throughout the webinar, we're going to share this slide as a handout with you in a moment. This is going to be a PDF file that you can download. You can open it up. You can have it in, next to this webinar if you'd like, and you can, continue to kind of refer to it if you need to, if you want to refresh your memory of which part of the file I might be talking about, though I'll try to do my best to clarify. So if that's something that you'd like, make sure you download that now. Moving on to our 3-step workflow, let's get into it. So the workflow is really designed to ensure that your files have accurate data. That's the number one goal. Having accurate data is really the signature of a well-organized database. And data accuracy, again, it's the most important characteristic that makes your data usable and purposeful. Incorrect, incomplete, or inaccurate data will impact your insights, your reports, and also just how easy it is to find files within your database. Data shows that it takes, on average, just 1 minute to verify your file's data as it's entered into Neat. And the longer that you don't deal with your files and let them pile up, the more time you'll have to spend down the line fixing them. That is why we recommend this 3-step workflow that will help to ensure that your data is accurate and therefore meaningful and usable. In step 1, you need to review your files and check them for accuracy. Now, Neat does help you out with this step by extracting key information from your files with our OCR technology. In step 2, you need to make sure that each one of your file's category fields is filled in with the category that best represents the type of file or expense it is. And every one of you can categorize your expenses in your own unique way for your own unique needs. And then lastly, you need to make sure that your file is in the right place within your file cabinet, in the right folder within your file cabinet. And I know that seems really simple, but you would be surprised at how often our support team discovers that, a customer has maybe accidentally put their file in the wrong folder. So we're going to take a look at each of these steps individually now. So again, we're approaching this and we're thinking about, you added a bunch of files to Neat. Now what do you do with them now that they're in Neat? For this, we've added a bunch of files to Neat. What I really recommend doing is logging into Neat and getting into the habit of checking your needs review filter. Now, I put a screenshot of the needs review filter up at the top right-hand corner of this slide. It has that little yellow star next to it. The needs review filter is going to show up in your left folder structure, right under where you see Organize My Files. And your needs review filter contains all of the new files that you've added to Neat since the last time you logged in, and it contains all of the files that you haven't yet reviewed in Neat. It really shows you exactly how many files you need to apply this workflow to, that you need to review and categorize and file away so that all of your files are up to date and organized within your database. So you've added a bunch of files to Neat, you log in, you check the needs review filter, and then you start applying this workflow. in step one of this workflow, you really need to focus on making sure that your data is accurate in two main parts of your file. You need to make sure that your file's item type is accurate. Is it the best item type for the type of file it is? And you also need to make sure that your file's detail fields are accurate as well. These are the fields that have factual data about your files in them. So quickly talking about item types, they are a standard way that your files are encoded in Neat for storage. And as I mentioned earlier, there are 9 different item types that you can store in Neat, and each one has its own set of file detail fields and functions. And those fields and functions affect other features and capabilities within the application. For example, in my file detail fields, I have 2 different types of files here. I have a document to the left and a receipt to the right. And you can see that each of these different item types has its own unique set of file detail fields. You can see how the document has things like title and type, whereas the receipt has vendor, amount, and sales tax. So you really need to be aware of your file types in Neat, how you're choosing to store your file types in Neat. Now, every user will have different storage goals with Neat, and therefore you may store different item types for similar files across different customers. It's really just important that you select the best match item type for your file based on what your storage goals are. So Don, I see you ask, what's the difference between statements and invoices? Well, we're actually going to share a handout with you right now, and this handout is going to go over and define all of these different item types, including the differences between invoices and statements. It's also going to highlight each item type's specific file fields as well. So if you're not sure about which item types to select for your files in Neat and you want some recommendations from us, then go ahead and download this PDF file, this PDF handout in a moment here that will explain all of that for you. You can keep it and you can access it however often you need to. All right. So again, in part one of our workflow, step one of our workflow, I've made sure that my item type is accurate. Then I need to make sure that all of my file detail fields are accurate, the factual data about my file. Now, Neat will help you fill out these fields through machine parsing and person learning or person review. However, no parsing tools are ever going to be 100% accurate. Factors like the quality of your source file and the format of your source file can impact the accuracy of the data that gets parsed from your file. And, checking your file detail fields for accuracy takes just seconds to complete on average. And really what it does is it ensures that you're going to have a well-organized database that is easily searchable and properly set up for reporting and insights later. So it's important you just take a quick peek at your file detail fields and make sure that they're accurate. All right, so let's move on to the next step of our workflow, and that is going to be to categorize your file. So in this step, you're going to be going down to the classification fields. These are your unique classifications of a file. Now, the category field I starred for you, that's the category field that I'm referring to. That is the most important part of this step, is making sure that that category field is filled out. Now, Neat will automatically categorize each of your files for you based on what it knows about the vendor it parsed from your file. However, the category that you end up selecting here is really up to you and what your unique storage goals are. Now, the category field is especially helpful for insights and reporting, and by having well-organized categories, you can monitor things like your spending patterns, and you can also identify areas where you may need to make some changes in your spending. Now, when you're categorizing your files, there are a few levels to how specific you can be with your categories. And there are really 3 different levels that you can go with. And you can see those category levels to the right here in this funnel. So you could go really high level and broad with your categories and do a level 1 category. That's very general, very broad, not very specific. Or you could get really specific with your categories and go with more of like a level 3 category, which is very distinct and detailed. Or you could go somewhere in between and, do more of a level 2 category that is a little more specific, but not super specific. For example, let me show you an example. I have this AMC receipt here that I picked up when I went to a movie. Now, when I added this file to Neat automatically categorized it for me as a general retail receipt. And that's fine. If I'm only using Neat for storage and I'm not interested in learning more about my data, then general retail is perfectly fine to leave as the category for this file. However, if I wanted to include this file in my reports later on, then, this receipt is going to be grouped in with all of my other general retail receipts. And then at that point, I'm starting to lose details and insights as to where I'm actually spending my money. Additionally, if I categorize everything as general retail or everything as a general category, and then I do a search or a filter for files later using that category, I'm going to have a much larger group of files to search through versus, being more specific with my categories and having smaller category groups. I could go with a level 2 category for this, which would be something that's more like entertainment. Now when I run a report and I include this receipt within my report, all of my entertainment receipts are going to be separated out from my general retail receipts. And now I'm starting to, piece together a picture of where I'm actually spending my money. And if I wanted to be as specific as I possibly could, I could go with a level 3 category for this file, which would be more like movies or like movie ticket. And then when I'm running a report, including this file, not only am I starting to see how much I'm spending on entertainment overall, but I could actually start to analyze different types of entertainment, like how much I'm spending on movies versus sporting events versus concerts. If you're lucky enough to get to do that stuff often enough that you are able to track it in Neat. I know this isn't a super realistic scenario. However, it is a pretty universal example that I wanted to provide you guys to kind of help explain the different category levels. Now, in a moment, T is going to share another handout with you guys. And this handout is going to go over these category levels a bit more for you. And it's going to provide you also with some sample level 2 and level 3 categories that you can use for inspiration for your own database. And we've included both personal and business category samples. So what I recommend doing is taking a look at the handout, taking a look at all of the samples, going through those samples and marking off which ones you might want to use for your own database. All right, going back one slide now. So we talked about the category field here, which we starred. That is the most important part of step 2. But there are also all of these other remaining fields in the classification section. Now, these other fields will not be automatically filled in by Neat. Neat doesn't know what types of projects you're tracking and customers and products that your file should be associated with. So you would need to fill these out manually. But Neat does give you the ability to create these lists of customers and projects and products. And then you can use those fields to filter things like your reports, filter your grid, and also to start to track specific purchases. Again, they're not really necessary as a part of the workflow, but adding these additional classifications will help you with searching and reporting on your files later on. We're going to move on to step 3. So once you've checked your item type is accurate, you've checked that all of your file detail fields are accurate, you've classified your file, and you've categorized it away. Now you can move on to the final step of this workflow, which is to make sure that you save the file in the right folder within your database. And I know this seems really simple, but it's an important step for making sure that your database is easy to manage. And your cabinet folder structure is really going to set the precedent for how you organize your files. And if you're not careful, you could create more work for yourself down the line if you just start creating a bunch of folders and throwing files in them. Neat's customizable folder structure allows you to organize your data and manage your files in a way that, fits your unique needs best. And while each one of you will have your own unique folder needs, there are a few common structures that we can recommend to you and some tips that we can share with you to help set up a folder structure that is easy to manage. So my biggest tip for setting up a folder structure is to keep it simple. Actually, the fewer folders that you have, the better. For example, I would store all of my receipts, documents, invoices, and reports for one specific project or goal in a single folder, rather than saving them across multiple folders. It's actually going to be much easier for me to run reports and filter my files and find my files later with fewer folders. Now, I think it's perfectly fine to have a bunch of parent folders and, some subfolders within those parent folders. Where it starts to get tricky is when you have subfolders within subfolders within subfolders. That's what I recommend avoiding. Try to, simplify your folder structure a bit. Another tip that I have for you guys is, if you're using Neat for both business and personal, which a lot of people indicated they are using, Neat for both, then I recommend making sure that you keep your business and your personal files separate. And there's a simple way to do this. All you really need to do is create two main parent folders. You can see I have a little screenshot there for it. One that you label business, one that you label personal, and then you can nest all your subfolders for each of those different file types within those two main parent folders. Some other common folder structures that we see are organizing your files by year, which is why, and that's probably like our most popular, which is why I started. But we also see lots of customers organize their folders by project or by customer or by property as well. And we're going to share a handout with you guys. This is going to be the last handout that we share with you today that is going to include some recommendations for picking a folder structure based on some of our top use cases. So that handout's going to be available in a moment. If there's any of the other handouts that you also want to download, you should see a list of them when this one becomes available. You can download those, any ones that you missed, just by clicking the handouts tab or downloading that other one now. Alrighty, so I have one last thing that I want to talk to you guys about in terms of folder structures. I wanted to address a common question that we get about folder structures in Neat. And in order to answer this question, I'm actually going to share my screen with you guys and show you guys my Neat account. So just give me 1 second while I set that up. The question that I really want to answer for you guys is this common question of how do I get my folder structure in the order that I want it to appear? So we can see my folder structure here to the left. Now, all of the folders that you see here in my folder structure, I created manually. You will not have any of these folders in your database. You actually might have a business and personal folder because there are some starter folders that we set you up with, but everything else is all custom created by me. So if your folder structure doesn't match, that's on purpose. So by default, Neat orders your folder structure in alphabetical and numerical order. So what will happen is we'll have customers who need to create a folder for years. So for example, I created a folder for 2024. And then what they want to do is they want to create a subfolder for each month of the year within that 2024 folder. And typically they do this because, they're doing a lot of monthly reporting. So they'll create, a folder for January and they'll put everything that they have or they accumulate in January 2023 or 2024 into that folder, which makes it easy for reporting. However, when they do that, what they end up with is a folder structure that looks like this, where April ends up being the first month in the order and September ends up being the last month in the order. And the reason for that is because, again, Neat orders your folders in an alphabetical order. So that isn't what they want. What they want is they want to see their months in order of sequence, how they would see them actually on a calendar. So if that's something that you want to do, if you want to have your folders show up in a specific order, then what I recommend doing is switching over and utilizing Neat's ability to order your folders in numerical order instead. And so here I have an example where all I did was just assign each one of my folders a number. And now by doing so, we can see that January is the first month in my order and December is the last month in my order. And I was able to order this exactly how I want just by assigning each folder a number. Another example here is a previous webinar that we ran called Managing Your Files in Neat. I created this, again, custom created these folders here, and I had a specific order of topics that I wanted to talk about. And in order to accomplish that, I just assigned each one of the topics a number so that I could see them in the order that I preferred. So if that's something that you'd like to do, then I recommend using the numerical order. Otherwise, Neat will just put it in alphabetical order for you. All right, so that brings us to the end of, talking about our 3-step workflow. Now I really want to move on into a quick demo where I can apply this workflow for you guys and just show you how I would go through and actually manage and organize my files away. So I've added some new files to my Neat account, and you can see that they're in my needs review filter. Again, my needs review filter is up here at the top left-hand corner of Neat. In the, in the folder structure area under organizing my files. And again, I just want to remind you guys that, all of your newly added files, everything that you haven't yet reviewed in Neat is going to show up in this needs review filter. And it's going to show up in that filter regardless of whether or not you selected a folder when you scanned or imported or captured your file. As you can see, like I have all of my files in my needs review filter are actually saved in a variety of different folders, like webinar, business, and personal. But my needs review filter is containing a copy of each of these files. And any changes that I make to my files here in my needs review filter will also be reflected on my file in the folder that it's sitting in. So I don't need to go through the hassle of trying to find all the new files I just added in all of the different folders I added them to. I can just come here and see everything new that I added and needs to be reviewed and update them here, and they will be updated in my folders as well. All right, so let me open a file and let's review it. Let's apply this 3-step workflow to this file. So first, I want to make sure that my file is set as the correct file type. In this case, it is. So we can see, this is a receipt for a train ticket. And so I would leave it as the receipt item type. Now, if you select an item type and then later on you decide that you need to change it for some reason, you absolutely can. All you need to do is click on the drop down for item type and select another item type. Here, you can select a different item type again if you selected the wrong one. And once you've selected the right item type, you can click reprocess. And then any and all files that get reprocessed are going to end up back in your needs review filter, just as if it was added to Neat for the first time. So you're essentially just adding it right back to the top of this 3-step workflow, which is convenient. Below my item type, we can see that I have all of my receipt file detail fields here. And we can see that Neat process and parse data from my receipt for me using our OCR technology. And, OCR is the process that really converts an image of text into machine-readable text. And it's also what makes it possible for me to do keyword searches on my files later. So for my receipt item type, I want to make sure that my vendor is accurate, which in this case it is. I want to make sure that my date is accurate, which it is. And date is also another very important file field that you want to make sure is accurate for each of your files. It's going to make it much easier for you to find your files later and report on them later as well. I want to make sure that my payment type is accurate, which it is. My amount is accurate as well. And then any sales tax that I have is accurate. So for me, Neat already processed and parsed all of this data for me, and all of the data looks accurate. So I'm done step number 1. I can move on to step number 2, and I can now categorize my file. Now, Neat automatically categorized this file as transportation. And that's great. That would be considered a level 2 category. If I wanted to do more of like a level 3 category here, I can maybe update this to train ticket instead. And now, I'm still tracking transportation, but I'm tracking individual forms of transportation, like trains versus Ubers versus flights. I could go in and I can add some additional classifications here. Maybe I'll add a classification for file organization webinar. And I could even add some notes if I needed to. And just like that, I'm done step 2. I've now categorized my file. I've categorized it in a way that I'm going to see a lot of valuable insights in my reports when I run a report, include this file later on. Last step is to make sure that my file is in the right folder within my database. Now, applications like the Neat mobile application and the Neat scan utility will allow you to choose a folder during the upload process. So you might be able to just skip this step altogether, but I do highly recommend that you come in and you do check to make sure that your file is in the right folder. Sometimes, especially if you're separating files between like business and personal, you might have similar subfolders like business expenses or personal expenses. So you just want to double check and make sure you didn't store a business expense in your personal or vice versa. This is in the right folder for me, so I can go ahead and I can just click save and I'm done. This file has, I've officially applied this 3-step workflow to this file now. It's officially accurate, categorized, and it's in the folder that I need it to be. It's very simple, but doing these steps will ensure that it's so much easier for me to find and report on my files later on. Now, if there are more files in my needs review filter, then as a part of this workflow, I would just continue working on them one by one until I cleared out my needs review filter and there were no files left to review. And I recommend getting in the habit of doing that every time you log into Neat. And once you get into this rhythm, you may only need like 5 to 10 minutes per week to, add any new files to Neat, come in, check that they're accurate, categorize them, and file them away so that they're neatly organized in your database and that you have this well-organized database that you can use later on. Let's take a look at our next file in our needs review filter. So we have this target receipt here. We're going to apply this workflow again, but I wanted to share another quick tip for you guys here. You can also actually use keyboard commands to tab through your file and update your files as well. So I'm going to update this file using only my keyboard. So I can tab down to receipt, and if I click enter, I can choose a different item type if I need to. It's a receipt item, it's a target receipt, so that's the best folder for it to be in. I can tab over to folder, and I could select a different folder if I needed to. I just want to store my file in my personal folder, so I'm going to leave it there. One thing that I do want to clarify is, I know that we put this workflow into a specific order, checking for accuracy, categorizing, and filing away in a folder. But you can kind of do each one of those steps interchangeably if there's a, if it's easier for you to update the folder as a second step because it's right next to your item type, as long as you are, making sure to check those individual spots, then you can really do it in any order you prefer. I'm going to leave it in my personal folder. Next, I'm going to tab down to my vendor. So the vendor is Target, and so that is accurate. So Neat parsed that data correctly for me. We have a date here. It looks like my date is accurate. I can tab down into my calendar here and, I can pick a different, month if I needed to. I could pick a different year if I needed to. And I can even tab down into, I can even tab down into the calendar here and choose a different date if I needed to. Leave it as 8/6. I can tab over into my payments, and you can select, from your lists here I'm just using my keyboard commands right now. I'm just using tab and my directional pad. We'll leave it as debit. You can change amounts if you need to. I'm just going to scroll up and make sure this is the right total. That is the right total. And it looks like this is also the right sales tax as well. So again, step 1 of my workflow is done. I've already done that. I can tab down into my second section. So again, Neat categorized this file as a general retail receipt. And that makes sense because Target sells a variety of different products or services. So it's going to choose just a general retail category. It doesn't know exactly what you purchased. I happen to know that this is for school clothes. So what I can do here is I can update this category. I could change it to clothing, which would be more of like a level 2 categorization, or I could update it to like school clothing. if I wanted to do a level 3 category and be as specific as I possibly could. Then I can even tab down even further. I can select a project. I'll choose my file organization webinar project. I can tab down into my notes and add notes if I need to. And I can even tab all the way to the save button because I've checked my item type. It's in the right folder. All of my detail fields are accurate. My categories are accurate. I've added additional classifications. Now I can tab to save and click enter to save it. And now this item has been reviewed. I've applied this 3-step workflow, and now all of the data I need for this file is there. Let's do one last one. Again, so we have a Rite Aid receipt. Receipt is accurate. Let's see, the vendor is accurate. The date is accurate. We can see the date here. I can actually highlight some of these things for you. The date is accurate. You can see this was a debit, which is accurate. The amounts are accurate, and there's no sales tax. So again, Neat did categorize this as a general retail receipt. Rite Aid sells a variety of products. I happen to know that this was for a medication or a prescription. I could update this to a level 2 category, which would be more like, medical as a level 2 category, or it could be really specific and do a level 3 category and maybe label this medication or prescription or something like that to be more specific with my categorization. I can go ahead and I'll add another project. And I'm going to make sure that my file's in the right folder. This is supposed to be in my personal folder. Perfect. I can click save and I'm done. So again, I would just get into the habit, if I were just reviewing these files and I wasn't demonstrating for you and kind of talking through how to do these, it would take me maybe a minute at most to go through each one of these files and make sure that they're accurate and categorized and in the right folder. I recommend just, continuing working through those files in your needs review filter until everything has been cleared. Now, if I close this, we're going to see that I now only have 7 files within my needs review filter because the 3 files that we just went through have all been organized and filed away and reviewed, and so they're no longer showing up here. All right. So that actually brings me to the end of our demo today. I want to take some time now to answer some questions that may have come in. Let me see here. I'm just going to switch over to my screen or to the chat screen here and see if there's anything that I can specifically answer for you guys. Just scrolling to the top here. Oh, I see a question from Melissa that just came in. Melissa says, let's bring up Melissa's question here. So Melissa says, can I copy my folders? Melissa, that is a great question, and absolutely you can. So this is a common question that we see too with folder structures. If you recreate the same folder structure every year, the folder duplication feature is perfect for you. So I'm going to demonstrate that real quick. So we have like my 2024 monthly order for folders here. Let's say, for example, I wanted to create a new set of folders for 2025. In order to do so, I can right click and I'll actually, I'll zoom in for you guys a bit here. It's a little tiny. Sorry about that. I can right click on any folder that I want to duplicate or copy. And then I can click the duplicate option here and I get some options. You can include subfolders. So if you choose to include subfolders, the main folder plus all of the subfolders and any subfolders within subfolders will all also be copied for you. And I can just now relabel this to 2025 and remove that copy and click duplicate. And Neat is going to work on creating those 13 folders for me. And I don't need to go in and manually type them all in. And now we can see that I have this 2025 folder structure. And we can see that it has the same subfolders that my 2024 folder had as well. So Melissa, I hope that answers your question. I see some questions about searching. So so Neat does allow you to do some keyword searches. We're going to do a whole webinar where we talk about keyword search and how you can use sorting and filters to find files easily in Neat. one of the things that I was kind of showing you guys earlier is that, if I switch over, if I'm viewing a file and I switch over to this little arrow here, it's called the text selection tool. And this text selection tool kind of allows me to highlight things directly on my receipt. So I can actually copy text that was recognized by our OCR parsing directly from the file. I can actually copy it and even add it to like my notes and to other sections of, or to other applications if I'm looking up part numbers and things like that. But what it's demonstrating here for you is that, basically all of these words are keyword searchable. So if I was looking for something specifically, if I was maybe looking for a Target receipt, I could just type in Target. And then, it'll bring up everything that kind of matches that. So it's showing me all the files that are named Target, that have Target somewhere in the file itself, somewhere in the data of the file. So we're seeing all of my Target receipts here. What I really recommend doing with keyword search is it's much more powerful when you use it in combination with some other filters too. So for example, maybe I'm looking for that school clothing Target receipt. We'll just reorganize this so I can't see it at the top. But, maybe I have 15 files that showed up when I searched Target. I could search through all individual of these 15 files looking for the one that I want, but if I happen to know that it was uploaded on a specific date, or I know that it was for a purchase for school clothing, I could apply an additional filter to it. Could filter to just receipts. I could apply a filter for category, and then I could search or apply the category school clothing, and then there's only one file that's going to pop up for that, and it makes it much easier to find that specific file that I'm looking for, especially if I had like hundreds of files related to Target or something like that. So just a quick view of what keyword search is. Like I said, we're looking to do a whole webinar on searching and how you can use that in combination with filters and sorting to find files. Let's see what else. Richard asks, how can I download all my data in a useful format like Excel, not single downloads, but multiple? Richard, there's two recommendations I can make here for you. Either one, you can export all of your data out. If you have a bunch of files that you want to export out to an Excel file, you could select them all and then click the export drop down here and choose data as CSV. And what will happen is all of this data is going to get exported out as a CSV file that you can import to Excel or, your Google Sheets if you're using that instead. And it's going to export, all of the details associated with the files as a CSV file. The other thing that you can do is, and I'm not sure if you need the images or not, if you need the images as well, then actually what I recommend doing is creating a report instead. You could create something like a spending detail report and filter to all of the files that you want to include within your report or that you want to export. And you can actually include images this way. So it'll export, and I can do them like one image per page. And it's going to export, or it's going to create a report with all of my images included. And I can also choose to download this report as a CSV file at the same time. So not only am I getting this report with all of the images that I want to include, but I'm also creating this CSV file of all of the data associated with those images as well. And in that way, you're able to download, you could then print the report or download the report from Neat. It'll be a PDF file with all of the images in it. And in that way, you're kind of able to export them in bulk versus one by one. And then you also get that CSV download that you can use for Excel as well. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see what other stuff has come in. William says, you're filtering stuff, but I can't see the filter button. Can you tell me where this is? William, yeah, so the filter button, so let's go to my all files folder. The filter button should be up at the top of any one of your grids next to column and item type. So columns allows you to adjust with which columns that you can view in the grid. Item types is another filter itself. It's just a specific filter for item types. And then you have the filters drop down here, which is where I added my filter. So that's the filter that I was looking at. I hope that answers your question. Okay, so Stephen has some interesting questions here. So give me 1 second, Stephen. I have a little resource here that I'm going to refer to for this. So the different, you asked specifically, what's really like the difference between, like receipts, invoices, statements and stuff. So how should you store those items in Neat? So my recommendation is that whenever you're tracking any sort of purchase, any sort of paid invoice or paid bill or paid statement, that you're tracking it in Neat as a receipt rather than an invoice, a bill, or a statement. And the reason for that is because receipt item types are our most flexible item type. You can use receipts for your reports, you can use receipts for your filtering and your searching, and you can also use receipts for some integrations that we have with other accounting softwares. Whereas things like invoices, bills, and statements are not going to show up in your Neat reports, and not all of those item types flow through to your integrations either. So anytime you're tracking a purchase, a paid invoice, a paid bill, a paid statement, I actually recommend saving it in Neat as a receipt type instead of an invoice or bill. I would really only store a file as an invoice in Neat if my goal was to send those invoices over to another accounting integration like QuickBooks Online or QuickBooks Desktop. And I would, if you are tracking your own invoices in Neat, then I would actually recommend using the invoices section of Neat with our Neat plus automated insights package that allows you to create custom invoices, track payments for those custom invoices, and the like. But I wouldn't actually store invoices within my file cabinet unless my goal was to really send them over to my accounting softwares. And when it comes to like bills and statements, I would really only track bills and statements in Neat as to be paid in the future. And then once they are paid, I would actually go back to that bill or statement and change the item type over to a receipt, indicating that it's something that has actually been paid for or already, already billed for. So that's really what I would do there. And again, it's mostly because receipts actually flow through to your reports and into your integrations where these other item types don't. Let me go back here. What was the other part of the question? So do vendors apply across the board if you have a vendor for a receipt and the same vendor for an invoice? Yes, they do. So your vendor lists will apply across the board to any item type that supports a vendor file field. So you'll see the same vendor lists for your receipts as you will for your invoices. I hope that answers your question. Let's see what other questions we have here. I have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, then we're going to wrap. Any questions that we don't get to today, do not worry. We will follow up with you at some point in time today and get you an answer for that question. Francisco has a question here about taxes. I think what you're asking about, Francisco, is if you're able to kind of like itemize a receipt that shows city tax, like specifically how much was spent on city tax and specifically how much was spent on state tax. And the answer to that is you can't do it within the file cabinet within Neat. The file cabinet in Neat is really going to collect just, the top most important information about your file. So it would take the sales tax that you paid on city and state tax and combine it into one. If you're interested in doing more itemizations of your files or your transactions, what I actually recommend doing is that you set up an automated insights package with Neat where you're able to connect accounts and transactions for streaming. In the accounts and transactions section of Neat, you can itemize all of your transactions. You can apply as many items as you want to your transactions, and you would be able to, categorize specific city tax versus state tax in that section of Neat. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's see, I might have time for one more question. So a quick question here. Matthew asks, is there any way to use Neat to upload data into Quicken? Yes, there is. So you have, I have all of my files here. Quicken has very specific item types. So Neat doesn't have a perfect direct integration with them. However, you can export files out of Neat to these Quicken specific files. They are proprietary Quicken files that you can export your files out to. So for example, if I have some files here, I can select the files I want to send over to Quicken. I can click the export drop down here, and then I can choose data as QIF or data as QFX, which are two proprietary types of files that are only accepted by Quicken. So you can send them over. It's a two-step process because you do have to export and then import those files into Quicken, but you absolutely can if you need to do that. So it was a nice quick one. Again, guys, any questions that we haven't gotten to today, we will make sure to follow up with you before the end of the day. So I want to share with you guys a survey. So this survey is going to pop up in a second here to the bottom left-hand corner, and this is just going to ask us how we did. How do you feel this webinar went? You know, what other stuff do you want us to cover? What can we improve? There are some optional questions in there to let us know what types of files you're storing in Neat and, you know, what features are most important to you. Let us know. Any feedback that you guys provide within these surveys is super helpful to us to plan out future webinars. You know, it really just helps us stay on the pulse with the types of stuff that you guys are interested in seeing in these webinars. So take a look at that survey. And that brings us to the end, guys. I appreciate you guys so much. Thank you so much for joining me today for this, you know, webinar, this little lunch and learn, taking an hour out of your day to spend with me. As I said, we'll be following up with any questions that we haven't answered, but I just hope that you guys all have a fantastic rest of your day and a fantastic weekend. And thanks. Thanks, guys. Bye.